Hola, ¿cómo están? Welcome to my channel. I need to talk to you about the Open Societies Foundation. The founder is George Soros, but another gentleman that you're probably not familiar with, Nair. I would like to speak to you about the fact that they have let criminals out of prison intentionally, and I believe they have let criminals out of prison intentionally in order to execute a revolution. You say, well, how can you be so sure that that's why they're letting criminals out of prison intentionally? I say to myself, well, okay, let's look at the background of this gentleman, Mr. Nair, that I'm not too familiar with. Mr. Nair is very prominent for writing this book, Defending My Enemies, American Nazis, the Skokie Case, and the Risk of Freedom. So Mr. Nair is responsible for defending the Nazi Party. As a founding member of the Open Societies Foundation, one could say that the Open Societies Foundation supports the Nazi Party. I mean, one can make that logical connection. And you say, why would they support the Nazi Party? And if anything, I will attest that they support the Nazi Party out of admiration of their ability to overthrow. This is how I mean. This is a review of the book, Defending My Enemy. And it talks about, paraphrases some of the arguments Mr. Nair makes. Nair argues, however, that since the Jews are today such a small minority, they cannot depend on force and power to protect themselves. Instead, they must depend on freedom to speak, publish, and gather, even if this preservation of these rights temporarily might benefit their enemies. Seeing that, that to me says that Nair is protecting his enemies in order to protect his own rights. And so why is he's protecting his own rights? He's obviously plays the long game. So Nair asserts, so he's protecting the rights of his enemies because he's protecting his own rights. He admires what his enemies were able to do, and so he would like to be able to execute in the way that his enemies have, but he's currently not strong enough. So he's saying to himself, well, let us be able to keep our freedoms as we slowly coalesce and become strong enough to imitate our enemies and be more successful than they were at their same game. Nair asserts that the events of the Nazi rise during the German Weimar Republic probably could not be repeated today. He maintains that the Nazis' meteoric rise was due to the intentional neglect of the German government in prosecuting Nazi murdering and lawbreakers. Furthermore, he notes that this failure to prosecute is not shared by the current American government. So this is Nair's idea. This is Nair's thought that if you do not prosecute criminals, that there's a very high probability of an insurrection that is on par with the German rise of the German Weimar Republic. So he's defending his enemies because he admires his enemies. He's defending his enemies because he admires his enemies' tactics, and he wants to execute with those tactics once he becomes strong enough. And if you look at what's going on in the 21st century today, one is obviously able to see that this gentleman has been able to execute on his plan completely. The Open Societies Foundation is no longer weak. They have a budget of, they have assets in excess of $2 billion, so that is not weak at all. They have been releasing criminals left and right. One of their founders says that if you release criminals into society, large-scale insurrections will happen. So I think this connection is very blatant, very obvious, and it's probably the #1 reason why I've never heard of Mr. Nair, because it was not too difficult to make these connections between his ideas behind releasing criminals and him releasing criminals in the current era. Please look into this Open Societies Foundation. Please look into Mr. Nair. Please look into his book, Defending My Enemy, and his rationale behind defending the Nazi Party, and then compare it to what's going on currently. One might even be able to say that this is the Open Societies Foundation is the Nazi Party 2.0. Open Societies Foundation is the 1,000-Year Reich 2.0. Nair, he was born in Nazi Germany, so was George Soros. Both of them escaped due to very questionable tactics, and then they admired their enemy. They admired this strength, and they wanted to imitate them. And now it seems as if in the 21st century, Mr. Soros and Mr. Nair are being able to imitate the enemy that so nearly destroyed the world. Please take all this into consideration. Thank you so much for listening.